everybody? Yes, this is where we are. It's a fair showing for an exams week. I know everyone's got exams, so thank you for coming. What have we got? We've covered, if we can. Yeah, we covered the multiplier. This is where we were last time. We covered how do you calculate it, what is it, what's the story behind it, and that's the main punchline from this model. And so now we can start talking about this. We have a very, very simple model, obviously. It's not explaining everything in the economy, but we can start talking about policy now. We're going to want to add more to it. We're going to have a more interesting, in-depth view of policy, but now that we have a model, now that we have a story about how the economy works, we can start to talk about how we could maybe use the tools at our disposal to make things better. So the general idea in macroeconomics is about stabilizing planned spending. So remember, in this model, the reason people buy more stuff, the reason the economy booms or the reason the economy crashes is about spending. We're in a depression because people aren't spending enough to keep everything moving. If nobody's buying anything, no haircuts get cut, the barber feels poor, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle. If everyone starts spending, then the barber feels rich, he starts spending as well, and so on. So in this story, where recessions are coming from is people becoming, for example, pessimistic about the future. And you stop thinking that the future is bright, so you stop spending, and then through the multiplier, that has a really large effect on output. Right? So as a tool of policy, we would like to stabilize spending, so we didn't have these booms and crashes. And so stabilization policies are a big part of what we talk about in macroeconomics. How to stabilize the economy. Now, obviously, there's more we would like to do with the economy than just stabilize it. We would like, for example, to have growth over time. We would like to have that be sustainable growth that doesn't destroy the planet. There's lots of stuff we would like to have happen. But generally in macroeconomics, we're talking about stabilization policies. And well, that's not true. In introductory macroeconomics, we are. It branches out later on, but at this stage, we're talking about stabilization policies. That's a large part of what policymakers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We're in a recession. What the heck do we do about it? So in our model, we have recessions and expansions are created by planned aggregate expenditure. Planned aggregate expenditure is low this year, we have a recession. Planned aggregate expenditure is high this year, we have a boom. Okay? And so if we're trying to stabilize the economy, we're going to want to try to counteract that. When planned aggregate expenditure is low, we're going to want to try to raise planned aggregate expenditure. And when planned aggregate expenditure is high, we're going to want to bring it back down. Now, one thing to notice is there's a little bit of sleight of hand in this slide, because we talk about stabilization policies are used to affect planned aggregate expenditure to eliminate output gaps, right? And remember, the output gap is how different our output is from normal output, from potential output, right? But in this model, we have no notion of potential output anywhere. There's no sort of capacity constraints. And again, that's because we developed this model for the Great Depression, and we were well below capacity constraints. There was lots of resources being unused, so we just ignored that. But of course, in reality, there's only a limited number of chairs in the barber shop, right? And you can only produce so much stuff before you reach your capacity constraints. In real life, there is sort of a normal, natural level of output. Potential output is a thing. And we will want to take that into account, but at this stage, we haven't done that. So there's nothing about potential output in here. So there's nothing about output gaps in this model. Okay? But I'll ask you to bear with me and trust, and you never trust your teachers, obviously. But you should, obviously, actually you shouldn't, right? But you should understand rather than trust. But never trust your teachers, but I'm gonna ask you to trust me for a little bit, and we're gonna pretend like there's potential output here and there so we can talk about stabilization policies. But in order to really talk about them, we would want a more sophisticated model, which we will have, but we just don't have it yet. Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, trying to eliminate output gaps. Here we say government. We're using sort of a very broad notion of government. There's some agencies, particularly central banks, which we'll get to in the next chapter, that are not necessarily government agencies technically, but from a point of view of a citizen, they feel government-ish, and we're going to call them sort of government in a broad sense. Okay. So there's two broad types of policies you could have, and you may guess they're expansionary policies when we're trying to increase planned aggregate expenditure, and there's contractionary policies where we're trying to decrease planned aggregate expenditure. Now, if you just read the press, it always feels like what we should be doing is trying to get output higher, but we know that there's nothing. We don't want output as high as we can get it, because we could get high output by demolishing Dublin, by forcing everyone into slave labor, right? All these things would increase output. There is an ideal amount of output, and we could go above that, right? We could be working too hard for not enough benefit. Right? You want to balance this, right? Work-life balance kind of thing. And also there's some reason to think that if the economy has really high output, much higher than potential output, this can cause long-term problems, right? You can cause the crash to be huge rather than just a slowdown, right? And so many times when things are going really well, like output is really high, we might want to bring it back down because we fear that it's higher than potential output, and this is going to cause long-term troubles. So it's not natural if we just sort of read the popular press to think about contractionary policies as a thing, but they are a thing, because we can't, and we haven't seen it yet, but we can't be well above potential output indefinitely. So then we have some control of, do we want to come back now in a gentle way, or do we want to come back later in a huge crash that destroys the economy, right? So contractionary policies are a thing. They aren't a thing that governments do as often as they probably should, but because obviously elected government, like we're going to do policies that cost you your job is not a good way to get a vote, but they are a potential thing. And certainly monetary authorities, that is the central bank, does contractionary policies all the time. Well, all the time, like when they think they should, right? But regularly, it's not a surprise to them. Okay, so we're going to have tools. What tools do we have? Broadly speaking, we have two tools. We've got monetary policy and we've got fiscal policy. Monetary policy is going to be playing around with the money supply and interest rates in order to affect output. And fiscal policy is going to be playing around with government budgets in order to affect planned aggregate expenditure. Okay. We're going to leave mostly monetary policy till the next chapter because it takes a while to get there, but we have enough tools that we can talk about fiscal policy now. So we're going to do that. Okay. So our main tools of fiscal policy are government spending, which has a direct effect on planned aggregate expenditure, because you may remember that planned aggregate expenditure was equal to C plus IP plus G plus net. What have I done? Terrible things. Okay. Plus net exports. And look, G. G is right there. G, government spending. So if the government decides to spend more, and they're going to go out and buy some Irish products, if they buy an Irish product, that's one Irish product bought. And that's going to make that barber feel rich, and he's going to go spend money, and it's going to go through the miracle of the multiplier. It's going to increase output, right? So government can, if it wants to, just increase government spending, and that will increase planned aggregate expenditure. Okay? And its other option is taxation. It can tax people or lower people's taxes. And that is going to have an indirect effect on planned aggregate expenditure. Transfer payments I have as a different thing here, but it's really just negative taxes. That's also going to have an indirect effect on taxation. If I come to you and say, you have not been paying your taxes, you owe 1,000 euros in taxes, right? Well, that clearly is a tax, and that's going to make you sad, and that's going to cut into your budget, and you're going to have to stop spending as much, right? On the other hand, I could come to you and I could say, here, have 1,000 euros. That's going to make you happy. It's going to make you feel rich. It's going to make you start spending some, right? These are just the same thing. We're giving or taking money. So taxation and transfer payments, transfer payments, we give people money for child allowance, or we give them for retirement benefits or something where we're giving them money, but not for a service that they're providing now. We just give them money for whatever reason, maybe good reasons, maybe bad reasons, but they're not providing a service now. If we give them money, that's just like a negative tax. Right? So taxes and transfer payments from a macroeconomic perspective are exactly the same thing. Taxes, we take money from you. Transfer payments, we give you money for whatever reason. And it's just the opposite side. So they're both going to have indirect effect on planned aggregate expenditure. Why? Because if I give you 1,000 euros, you haven't done anything for that 1,000 euros. You have not created 1,000 euros worth of value. You've created no value. You've just been sitting there watching TV. So lazy. You've just been doing that. But then indirectly you say, now I'm rich. Let me go out and buy some pizza. And you go and buy some pizza, and now the pizza guy produces the value. So the value the value that's added to output is indirect. Because you feel richer, you start buying stuff. Compared to if the government spends 1,000 euros and they go out and buy 1,000 euros worth of pizza, 1,000 euros worth of pizza got bought, that's a direct effect. And then the pizza guy feels rich and he goes out and buys other stuff as well. Right, so there's a more direct effect with government spending than there is with taxation, transfer payments. But they're both going to affect output in the same way. Okay, so here we go. Okay, that's a goofy little thing. This is showing up on the wrong slide. Ignore this. Ignore the man behind the curtain. Here we're in a situation where we feel that output is not high enough. And we want to increase our output. How can we do this? Well, we've got our planned aggregate expenditure, C plus I plus G plus net exports. And so one thing we could do is we could increase government spending. If we increase government spending, that is going to shift this line vertically up. Shift it vertically up. Oh, magic. Increase in G, and output is going to go up. And output is going to go up by more than the increase in G because of the multiplier. Right? We spend 10 more, and output goes up by 50 in this example. We spend 10 more. We've bought 10 euros worth of pizza. The pizza guy produces 10 euros worth of pizza, and then he feels rich, and he goes to the pub, and he buys some beer, and then that's output is increased there as well. Right? He buys 8 in beer, because it's got the marginal propensity to consume of 0.8. And then the publican feels rich, and he goes out and buys a new car, and that guy feels rich, and so on and so forth, and output in the end goes up by 50. And we can do the same thing by decreasing government spending, would obviously move that line back down. Okay, now suppose this was the way we thought about the world. And we thought, when we go into a recession, and again, in this model, there's no potential output, so there's no natural way to think about recessions, but we know in real life there is. So let's pretend like everything's going along fine, and then the economy just collapses. Right? Some bank goes under, or the Americans do something dumb, whatever, output goes down, and people are out of work, and we say, this sucks, maybe we should do something about it. Well, clearly we can increase government spending, right? We could increase government spending in this model, and that would increase output. Okay? Suppose that's our plan. Well, in real life, this runs into some real problems. And you can imagine that we're going along, like step back from the little model a minute, and we're just going along, and things are going fine, and everyone that I know, because I'm the Taoiseach, everyone I know is doing fine because they're all on the dole, and everything's fine, and then I get rumors in the middle, like, things aren't going well, like people in Meath, they're losing their jobs, what's with that? And, let's go out to Meath and check it out, and we go around and we talk to our big donors, they're fine, they're all fine. But eventually we start to cop on that something's wrong. Okay? And you say, well, we have all these statistics. Well, GDP statistics only come out yearly. You can kind of get a feeling for them every quarter. You can kind of learn, like you can see unemployment rates weekly and monthly, but they fluctuate a lot. And so if it goes down a little bit, if unemployment goes up a little bit, you say, well, is that just a random thing that happened? Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, or are we in real trouble? Right? And so in real life, it's going to take a while for us to realize that we're in a real situation, that we have a real problem. It takes 1 or 2 months, maybe 3 months, to realize that the country's in a real problem, that we're really going into recession. And it's not just me that has to realize, but politicians in general have to realize this. And people are going to take different amounts of time. So it's going to take some time to figure out that we're actually in a recession. And that's time where we are not reacting to the economic conditions as they're coming down, because we're just learning what they are. Okay? And then we have to figure out what to do. Okay? And people are going to have different views on it. Some more right-wing economists are going to say, look, just get out of the way, the economy will correct itself. Right? If you start meddling in it, you're going to screw things up and it's going to make it even worse. And then some more left-wing economists are going to say, no, you really have to do something about it. I read Keynes back when I was a student, and therefore I know that you should increase government spending or reduce taxes. Okay, suppose you decide to do that. Well, it's politicians, right? It's a whole bunch of them. You all have to decide. That's going to take some time. And then you have to fight over, are we reducing taxes or are we increasing government spending? And you're going to have a fight over that, right? Because it matters and it's a thing. And then you have to say, okay, we decided that we're going to increase government spending to try to deal with this problem. But in Keynes's world, spending is spending. You just buy stuff. It doesn't matter what. Keynes doesn't care whether you just dig a hole and put all the money in it and then have people dig it up. It's not a problem for him. Either way, it will increase output. Okay, so what we spend it on doesn't matter in the world of this model. But in real life, it does, right? Someone wants a children's hospital in Dublin. Another person wants to finally fix Galway's water supply. Another one wants to do, right? Each politician wants the money to be spent on something else. And fair enough, because in Keynes's world, it doesn't matter. But in real life, you're actually buying stuff. It would be nice to buy good stuff that's useful and productive for the country. That would be good. And so if we're going to spend 10 extra in government spending, let's spend it wisely and smartly and in a useful way. Perfectly sensible, perfectly reasonable, but of course we're all going to disagree about which way that is. So we're going to fight over that for a while. And suppose at the end of this fight, we finally decide we're going to spend, yes, we're in a recession. We're going to spend some money. We are going to spend 10 more, and we are going to spend it on a hospital in Dublin. Awesome. Our job is done. The money is allocated, and our curve should shift, right? Well, no, because we decided to spend it, but we didn't actually spend it. And if you think about anything that government does, it takes a while from the decision to the actual spending. But we've decided to build a hospital in Dublin, lovely thing. So first thing we need to do is we need to go find a site. So we get a bunch of MBAs out, and they all go around and they scour Dublin to find the best site. And then they try to make bids on that site. Oh, and then planning permission, oh my goodness. And then the environmental impact statements and all of this. It is actually going to be years before we actually spend the money. Right? And this shift in the line doesn't happen until the money is actually spent. And building a hospital takes time, even if we're quick on the decision. Right? You don't put the roof on until you've built the walls, and so you haven't spent the money for the roof until you built the walls. And all of that's going to take time, and all of that's going to take. Right? And so we say, we just shift out the curve, but that's going to take a long time to happen. Right? And so even if we're very proactive in a democracy and in real life, even if we were a dictatorship, it would take time, it would take effort. And so we would not react quickly to negative conditions, right? And so this idea we just shift the curve back up, like people got pessimistic, the curve shift down, therefore we need to increase government spending so that the curve shifts up. That's going to take a while in real life. And during that time, all kinds of horrible things will happen. People will lose their jobs, they'll lose their house, their wives will leave them, because obviously no house, and so on. And also they're nasty when they're in a bad mood, so like fair game to her. But these terrible things will happen, right? And it's going to take ages to deal with it. So there's 2 big changes that have happened in the last 90 years. Right. I'm counting since 1929. So since 1929, in the world, sort of big macroeconomic things that have changed, we've got 2 of them. And one of them is automatic stabilizers. Now, automatic stabilizers are any kind of spending or taxes that get adjusted automatically without anyone having to think about it or make decisions about it or even know that there's a problem. Okay? And now, in principle, anything can be an automatic stabilizers, but the big ones came in since the Great Depression. Like a little after the Great Depression. It's different in every country, and all that's mixed up with independence here in Ireland, but it really happened in the 20th century, like early 20th century, worldwide, like every country I know has automatic stabilizers, and they all came in that kind of time frame. So what are examples of automatic stabilizers? So one of the big ones is unemployment benefits. Right? So in our little story about the government and them trying to make a hospital and all that, the first thing that happened was things started getting worse, and it took a while for the government to realize things were getting worse, right? Well, with unemployment insurance, if things get worse, somebody's going to lose their job. Suppose I lose my job. That sucks for me. In the old days, I would just go out and I'd start having to look for a job, and I'd have to live off my savings if there was any, right? But nowadays, we've all been paying into unemployment insurance. When I lose my job, I'll go down to the, what's it called, the office. I go down and I sign on to the dole, right? And by the next week, they're going to start giving me money, right? That's a transfer payment. They're transferring me that money so that I can get back on my feet, right? That's nice of them. And I paid into the system, and that's great. So we're automatically, without anybody even knowing there's a problem in the economy, we're transferring this money, right? And that's going to have an indirect effect on output because, yeah, I'm going to feel poor because I lost my job, but I'm not going to feel as poor as I otherwise would because they're giving me this money. And so I'm not going to cut back my spending as far as I would. And so that original shift down is not going to be as dramatic as it otherwise would. Okay, so, and this is without anyone even knowing that there's a recession. It just happens instantly as people start losing their job, unemployment benefits start getting paid out. Okay? And this makes recessions less dramatic than they used to be. And if you look at all the data, like you look at the graphs, recessions were way more dramatic before the Great Depression than they were afterwards. Like the down was much farther down. Another one, which we don't think about much, is income taxes. It varied by country, but sort of somewhere in the 20th century, most countries came up with some kind of income tax. And now we all hate them, of course, but the thing about income taxes is you only pay them if you have income. It's clever, right? And so if I lose my job, all of a sudden my tax bill goes way down. I don't owe the taxes that I used to owe. Right? And in a boom, I owe more taxes. And so that keeps the curve from shifting too much. And again, that happens automatically without anyone having to do anything or even realize there's a problem. Sales VAT taxes are also, they had some of these back before the Great Depression, but they became a bigger thing afterwards. And that is, I'm only taxed if I'm buying stuff. Right? And so if I stop buying stuff, I stop paying tax as well. Right? And that makes the shifts less dramatic. Right. And these are the big ones. There's others as well, but particular unemployment benefits and income taxes are huge. And they're one of the two things that have made recessions much, much less dramatic than they were in the 1800s. I don't have a lot to say about this other than, be aware this is super important. This is like a big deal. But it's, it is what it is. It's not too hard to grasp, but it's a big deal. Our other big tool of stabilization policy is monetary policy. And we're going to have a whole pretty long chapter on monetary policy because we need to know what it is and how it works and all of that. But while we're on this model, I'm going to briefly talk about how it works in this model. So just, some of the stuff won't make, it'll be easy to attack me on it because I'm not giving you the whole story. The whole story is in the next chapter, but just to give you a feeling of how it works in the model. Okay. So recall that we've redefined the word investment. The word investment in macroeconomics doesn't mean what it means in English. Okay. For us, investment means any spending that increases productivity, right? So things that are investment, if you build a factory, if you buy inventory, makes it easier to sell stuff next year. If you go to university, you hopefully, knock on wood, become more productive in the future. These are all things that are investment, right? You're going out of your way, getting a service or a good that's going to make you more productive in the future. Investment. Okay. Fine. But it also means that we've defined a lot of things that in English sound like investment, but for us they are not investment. In particular, things that are not investment are buying stocks in a company or loaning somebody money. These are not investment for us because it doesn't increase anyone's productive capacity. If I loan you money in English, sure, I'm investing and you're going to pay me back more in the end. And that's great. It's an investment of money, right, in English. In economics, not. It's not an investment. It's just a transfer of little slips of paper. Now you owe me, but nothing got created, no extra productivity happened there, right? Now I might loan you money, and then you might take that money and go off and build a factory. Building a factory would be investment, but the loan wouldn't. So it's not like these loans are unrelated to investment, but they, in and of themselves, they're not investment. Okay? This is crucial for us because we are going to think that with high interest rates, we are going to have less investment than we did before. Okay? And if you think of investment as loaning people money, this makes no sense whatsoever, right? Because if interest rates are high, then you're willing to pay me a lot if I loan you money. So naturally, I'm going to loan you more, right? But loaning money isn't investment. Okay? So it's important, this distinction in investment. Okay? So I'm thinking, let's say I have a pile of cash. So I'm Apple Computer. And I'm sitting on a giant pile of cash, so much cash, sliding down it on sleds every morning. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my cash? Well, if the interest rate is low, that means if I loan somebody this cash, if I just loan it to you, I don't get very much for it, right? And so I might as well build a factory. But if the interest rate is high, then when I loan you money, I get a lot from it. And maybe the factory idea wasn't a great idea anyway. And if I just sort of shuffle the money around and loan it to you, I get a lot higher return than if I built a factory. And so when the interest rate is up, I'm going to decide, let me not build the factory. Let me instead use my cash to loan it to somebody. So investment will decrease when the interest rate goes up. Right? And this is crucially dependent on the way we've defined investment, right? Which is the real spending on stuff. Okay? On the other hand, we might not have cash. Lots of companies don't have cash. Not everyone's Apple. In which case, if I want to build a factory, I have to borrow money. But the calculus is the same here. Right? If I want to borrow money, I have to pay the interest rate. The cost of building the factory then is the interest rate I have to pay in order to borrow the money to build the factory. And so if the interest rate is low, I'm going to, sure, it's cheap to borrow, and so I'm going to build the factory. But if the interest rate is high, it's expensive to borrow. It better be a very productive factory for me to want to buy it. So if the interest rate goes up, I'm going to buy less factories. Investment will be lower. So it's the same thing either way. For those of you who took microeconomics, the interest rate is just the opportunity costs of spending money on a factory. It's what you're giving up. If you have the cash, you're giving it up in return because you could have loaned it out instead. If you don't have the cash, you're giving it up because you actually have to pay someone that to borrow the money. But either way, the interest rate is a cost of doing this investment. Right? And this is like if you think about, I don't know, you or your parents thinking about buying a house. Right? If the interest rate is high, they say the monthly payments are ridiculous, I won't buy the house, I'll rent. And if the interest rate is low, they can afford to buy the house, so they buy the house. So with higher interest rates, they're less likely to buy a house. Right? And this is why we put housing in with investment, because it's the same thought process that the factory thing happens with the factory. Okay, so that's going to be our connection between sort of the financial market and the real side of the world. And from this, we can see what happens if we can change interest rates now. You're perfectly fair to say, like, how the hell can we change interest rate? We got a chapter on that, and that's what's coming up next. But for the moment, let's pretend like we have an institution, which is going to be a central bank, which can indirectly change the interest rates. Okay? In which case, if we have a low interest rate, here we have our real interest rate of 3%, we're going to have a high planned aggregate expenditure, because planned aggregate expenditure is C plus I plus G plus net exports, in particular I. Right? This investment is part of the spending. And so if the interest rate is low, they invest a lot. IP is very high, and so we get the curve very high. If, on the other hand, the interest rate goes up, people find investment expensive, or they have these better opportunities just by loaning the money to somebody instead of like building a factory. And so the number of factories built goes down, and the whole curve shifts downward, and that lowers output. Okay? So we can see the effect of monetary policy in this model. We, of course, cannot yet see why it works this way, like how we change the interest rate. We need to talk about how money works first. But we could see, like, if we could control the real interest rate, we could shift this curve up and down, and therefore we could have output higher or output lower. What do I got next? Okay, one more thing to do in this. One thing to say about this while we're here is to point out the craziness of this model, so that, right, we got what? Y, we got planned aggregate expenditure, we got our 45-degree line, and we got our planned aggregate expenditure line, C plus I plus G plus net exports, right? And so in our little story, we said if we want output to go up, right? Here's our current level of output. Here's what we get. If we want output higher, all we need to do is we can either reduce the interest rate, that will have investment go up, okay? But there's only so much you can do that. Eventually interest rate hits zero and things get weird. But one thing we could do is we could increase government spending, right? If we increase government spending, the whole line shifts up, like that. That is G going up, shifts the line up, and output goes up, and through the miracle, the multiplier goes up by more than the amount that we increased G, right, in this model. And we can do that, and we can do that to do stabilization policies and all. And I'm here to tell you, if you wait like a month, you'll see that this is a little robust, this basic feature, but it's not universal in the way it seems here. And in particular, we can know that this model is kind of crazed because, well, we increased G and output went up by a lot. We can do that again, right? And we can increase G again and output will go up by a lot. And if we want an infinite amount of output, all we have to do is increase G and increase G and increase G and increase G. And the more we increase government spending, the more stuff we've got. Now that's clearly ridiculous, right? Are we all on the same page that this is ridiculous? This is not the way the world works. We left something out of the model that's important. And I'm going to claim that one of the things that we left out that's important is this idea of potential output, that there is sort of a limit on what we can produce, that we don't have infinite barber chairs and we can get like 57 haircuts a minute. And right, there's a limit on the amount that we can produce. It actually takes effort to produce stuff that's not there in the model. There's only so many of us, so we can't produce an infinite amount of stuff that's not there in the model. But yeah, so it has this implication. This implication is real in this model, but it's clearly rubbish, right? So you can say, if you want, well, clearly the model is rubbish. I would claim that's probably going too far, right? Because it was a very simple model. It was obviously ridiculously simple. It is there to pick up something that's real, but a lot of stuff is going to be ridiculous because we've simplified the world down to a ridiculous amount. Okay? And so the thing that you're supposed to take away from this is the multiplier. What is this multiplier? Where does it come from? How do I calculate it? What's it on about? Can I show it in the graph? Can I show it in the math? Okay, that's what we're supposed to get out of this. And that is real. I think almost everyone agrees that the multiplier is a real thing. Some people find it more important, some people less, for reasons that we'll get to, but it's a thing. And so we do want to understand that thing as we add more sophistication to this. Right? So that's what we get out of this. That thing will stick around, the multiplier will stick around, but there'll be more going on as well. Okay? And you should see that this is clearly ridiculous. Like, this is worth knowing that the world can't literally work like this. Like, this is not a thing that could happen. So let's make it better. Right? Okay. Since the multiplier is our point, we should talk just a little bit about, if I could move this out of the way, is that possible? Yeah, little yellow dot on everything. Should talk a little bit about the multiplier. We have that. Okay. So we have this multiplier, which in our model was 1 over 1 minus c, where c was the marginal propensity to consume. Again, please, God, don't memorize that. That's pointless and useless. And it probably won't even be true in the model I give you on the exam anyway, so why? Like, why? But don't. But you should see that if the marginal propensity to consume goes up, the multiplier is going to be higher, and you should understand why. Right? So that's important. Okay? But that's the multiplier. And that's saying if we increase government spending by 1, how much does output go up? 1 times the amount times this multiplier. Right? So in this case, if c is 0.8, it goes up by 5 times. Right? If c is 0.9, it goes up by 10 times. And that's because the government spent the money, that produced output. Somebody felt rich, so they went out and spent some money, that increased output. That person felt rich, they went out and spent some money, that affected the output, and so on and so forth, right? It all circulated around. Okay. Now I want to compare this to what's called the tax multiplier. And that is, if instead of increasing government spending by 1, if I lowered taxes by 1. And this gets to this direct effect versus indirect effect that I was alluding to earlier. Right? When I spent 1, we bought 1 worth of stuff, and that 1 worth of stuff was produced. That was a direct effect. Now, if I reduce taxes by 10, which has the exact same effect on the government budget, right? They go into deficit by 1, or 10. I keep going back and forth between 1 and 10. If I reduce it by 1, they're going into debt by 1, right? If they spent more without raising taxes, that increases their deficit by 1. If they lower their taxes without changing their spending, that's going to increase their deficit by 1. But it's going to have a different effect on the economy. And that's because this tax has an indirect effect on output. Right? So if I lower taxes by 1, well, nothing happens directly. Right? You don't have to pay me that 1, and then you're happy. That's nice. But nothing happened. Whereas when I spent 1, that 1 was spent, and some stuff was produced as a result. And then you felt rich, and you did some stuff. Right? Now, when I stop taxing you, nothing happens, and then you feel rich, and you do some stuff. So as you feel rich, you're going to do the same stuff, but we don't have that initial effect. Right? When I'm spending, initial effect, you feel rich, do some stuff. Now, nothing, you feel rich, you do some stuff. And so there's a difference, right? And that difference is the initial 10, or initial 1, that I'm spending, and stuff is being produced. Right, so it's only indirect effect now, because it's only the effect that we get because you feel rich. If I stop taxing you, you feel rich and you do stuff, buy things. Whereas before, you produced some stuff and then felt rich and did those same things. So that initial production isn't happening when I lower your taxes. And so the tax multiplier is negative c over 1 minus c in this particular model. C being the marginal propensity to consume. Negative because when I reduce taxes, output's going to go up. So that's the negative. It has to flip the sign. So that's not interesting. The interesting bit is the C. Because my initial effect here is not the spending itself, but what you do, not the lowering of the taxes itself, but what you do in response to that. Right? The initial increase in purchases is your initial purchases. So if I reduce taxes by 1, you feel richer by 1, and then you go out and you start spending. How much do you spend? The marginal propensity to consume times 1. So when I reduce the taxes, my initial effect is C times however much I reduce the taxes. Right? Whereas when I spent money, my initial effect was just the amount that I spent, 1 times the amount that I increased government spending. So the tax multiplier is always going to be C times the regular multiplier. Okay? It's just the direct versus indirect effect. People looking at me like I'm nuts. It could be true. It could be true. You could be entirely right. Just because you think I'm nuts doesn't mean you're wrong. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, it's what I said in another form. Okay, that's the chapter on the Keynesian model. If I can end the show. And now we get to one of my favorite chapters, which is on money and interest rates. Okay, so we've sort of done the basic real side of the economy, the fiscal stuff, where you're actually buying stuff, actually producing stuff. Now, we haven't done it very sophisticatedly. We haven't dealt with potential output, so we're going to have to come back to that. But we want to talk about monetary policy because it's a big area of macroeconomics, and it is an area of macroeconomics that businesses look at very closely because interest rates affect businesses very closely, very often. And so they need to know what's going to go on with the interest rate, and it turns out that monetary policy is all tied up with the interest rate, right? And so for a business, particularly a large business, but yeah, even small businesses, like changes in interest rates are a big deal. So knowing what's going on with monetary policy is a big deal to a lot of businesses, in a way that knowing what's going on with fiscal policy, government spending, is more of a, oh yeah, they need to know what's going to happen to the economy, but the policy itself doesn't directly affect them. Whereas monetary policy will very often affect businesses directly. So for businesses, it's like important to understand what's going on with monetary policy, how it works, and that kind of thing. And sort of for a macroeconomist and just for our understanding of the world, I think it is very useful to think about what money is and how it works. And that's all tied up with the interest rates. So that's what we're going to talk about, money and the interest rates. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. What is money, demand for money, supply of money? And you can imagine there's going to be a line up, there's going to be a line down, there's going to be a magic point where they cross, right? Just supply and demand, it's going to be that kind of thing. You're not wrong. And that's going to give us how the money market works, which is an odd thing to think about, a money market, but we will have such a thing. And then we'll talk about how central banks control the money supply and the interest rate. Okay. We've already, by the way, seen a little bit why they control the interest rate, right? They can influence that planned aggregate expenditure by controlling the interest rate. They can make the economy boom, they can make the economy crash, they can play around with trying to stabilize the economy. So that's one of the main reasons they do it. Right. Okay, so the first thing we're going to say is what is money? And this is we're getting into philosophy and stuff, right? Because you kind of know what it is, you've got it, right? You've used money before, I think, most of you. I don't know how sheltered lives you live, but most people have seen money in their travels at this point, 21 years old. You know what money is, right? But you don't. We're going to redefine the word money. And so this is where a lot of people are going to lose the plot, not initially, but later on, because I'm going to redefine the word money for the purposes of macroeconomics, and it is not going to mean quite what you think money is. It's going to be related, it's going to be close enough that if you're not paying attention, you can miss it, but then a lot of things will stop making any sense whatsoever later on. So be aware that we're going to start out redefining the word. Okay. So what is money? For us, money is going to be absolutely anything that does what money does. It's a nice circular definition that keeps us safe. Like there's no way that we can get into any trouble here. Like when I was in school, I was, undergraduate, like where you guys are. I took this anthropology class. We had to take an anthropology class. So I took this anthropology class from a very famous anthropologist, the most famous academic in our university, which is like a podunk, terrible university. But she was very good, right? So as she comes on, and she starts her thing saying, well, I have an economist friend who says that every society has money. And that's not true, because I was just in a village over the summer, and so she goes off in the summer and she studies villages somewhere, and this village doesn't have money. So therefore, the economist is wrong. And this is very much a different definition sort of problem, right? So she's thinking about money like notes and coins and things that you trade around like we do, right? Like I know she's aware that it doesn't have to be dollars, it can be other things, but money, we know money, right? The money that we know, the English language definition of money, she's thinking about that way, whereas economists have redefined the word, and we get so used to the redefined word that we don't even notice that we've done it, right? And we just start thinking it's money. But in fact, for economists, money is whatever does money stuff. So if there's something in your society that does stuff that's kind of money-like, you've got money. Whether it looks like our money, tastes like our money, whatever, doesn't matter. If it's serving the purposes of money, it's money, according to us. It's a nice circular definition, so we're always safe from anthropologists attacking us because it's vague enough that we're good. So, obviously the next question is, what are the functions of money anyway? What does money do for us? Well, there's various lists that you can get. If you go on the interwebs, you'll find sometimes people have 5 things, sometimes I got 8 things, sometimes I got 3. We're going to stick with 3 main things that money does. Money serves as a medium of exchange. And this is going to be our big one. This is the one we're going to focus on. That is, when I want a cup of coffee, I don't have to go find a coffee seller that wants a lecture on economics. They're few and far between, let me tell you. Right? I just have to say, I've got some cash, take my cash, and they will give me coffee. And they are accepting the cash not because they want little notes of euros, but because they want to buy a Star Wars action figure. And they know that they can take that cash and they can trade it in on a Star Wars action figure, right? And so it's not really that anyone really wants the euros, it's that they want the euros so that they can go off and do something else. So it's just making that smoother and easier. Okay. Money is a unit of account. This is, we measure values in our case, euros mostly, right? We say, okay, I'm looking at the toothpaste aisle. This one is 2 euros for 100 milliliters, and this one is 3 euros for 150 milliliters, and this one. And we can say, how many euros is it per milliliter? I would say euros is a way that we can compare prices on things. Right? And we can say, and if one of them was in euros and one of them was in yen, right? We all had this experience on eBay or Amazon. You go off there and you're trying to buy something, and one of them is in Hong Kong dollars and the other one is in yen and the other one's in euros. So you say, I don't want to compare my Hong Kong dollars to my euros. So you convert them all into one currency so that you can compare the prices, right? That is, you're picking a unit of account. And in fact, bless their little cold hearts, Amazon has a feature. They realize that you want a unit of account. And so they have a unit of account button in the upper right. Oh, they call it currency, right? You pick your currency. But it's really picking what's your unit of account. And they'll convert all your prices into that one currency. Yeah, I'm sure most of us picked euros, but whatever currency you pick, they'll let you pick your unit of account. And then you can compare all the prices on one unit of account, and you're good, right? And so we use this a lot. And we use this without even thinking about it. But it turns out this is actually pretty important. Right? It makes so many things so much easier to have a unit of account that we can compare prices, compare values. We say, well, I'm working, I'm getting 20 euros an hour. How much can I buy with that? Well, I can go out and look at other things that are also posted in euros. And then I can say, okay, here's what I could afford to buy with the salary that I'm getting, and is it worth taking that job or not? Right? So this is a super important thing that we don't think about much, but is actually a thing that money does for us that's quite important. And you may notice if you've taken microeconomics that unit of account was sort of taken as given. Like we never even discussed it, but there was a discussion at the beginning that said, okay, everyone knows the price, right? When we're doing perfect competition, we say everyone knows the price, and so you buy from the cheapest one. And it was a throwaway line. But it really means that you're able to compare those prices, which means that you have a unit of account. You have a way to compare those prices with each other. And that's a service that money is giving us. Okay? Doesn't sound deep, but turns out is important. And we will see later examples of societies where the unit of account breaks down and the horrific things that happen when that does happen. Okay? And another thing that money does for us is it provides a store of value. Right? I can give a manky little lecture here, and the value, the tremendous value that I've created, that accrues to my bank account. And I can spend that money over the rest of the week. And so I can, for example, give this lecture now, and then take the money from the lecture and go out to eat tonight. I have stored the value from this lecture hours until I get to dinner time, right? Now that seems a little rubbish, but if you sort of think of it more abstractly, we all do this. Right? You get paid at the end of the month, and you take that value and you store it across the month, and you spend it not just on the day you get paid. Well, some of you, but most of us not on the day you get paid, but you spread it out, and that's storing value for you. And you can save up, for example. You can save up for a vacation. Say, I want to go on spring break, I want to go, so I'm going to cut back my spending now, and I'm going to save a little bit, and then I'll be in Paris in April, and that'll be awesome. Right? And you can save that value that you have now, and you can hold it on until April. And that is using euros in your bank account is a way that you can do that, to store the value that you create now till later. And you can imagine early societies as well. You go out and get your berries. Your berries are only going to last a day. You want some way to store that value so that you can use it later. Right? So store of value is something that money is going to do for us. There's others that we could put down here, but these are going to be our big three. Okay? All right. Medium of exchange is going to be the most important one, though. And nope, it's time to let you go. So I will let you go, and we'll go over them in a little more detail next time.